Hello YouTube! I didn't mean to cover you over there. This is the Student Witch, and this episode, or this video, is very special because of two things. For one thing, I have a guest with me. He is a graduate student in a department of education. He specializes in mathematics education. And most importantly, he's my husband.
Exactly.
Hello, husband. And we're here to talk about our perspectives, beliefs, and research into order and chaos. And this video will basically kind of reveal us summarizing what our spiritual philosophies or beliefs are when it comes to order and chaos, and how we think we exist in this universe. That being said, I think we thought of this video, or we conceived it, after watching a documentary here on YouTube, which we're going to include the link below so you can check it out. It's one of the best documentaries I've seen on the subject of chaos theory, fractals, and the interchange between order and chaos. It gives like the history of how these theories came about, and you know where they're going, and the different fields of knowledge that they affect. The documentary, sorry, we keep looking up at our whiteboard with all of our outlining and notes, but the documentary is called The Secret Life of Chaos. It was a BBC documentary. And overall, I was really impressed and satisfied with it, but there was one specific critique that we had, and actually you came up with it, my love. So maybe you can go over the critique plus what you said about it as far as like the power of the individual.
Right. Well, the documentary, first of all, I'd like to say something about the documentary. It's very interesting. I know probably many people have heard of and used the word chaos in daily life conversation. This documentary, it's more like giving a scientific and mathematical perspective on this topic. And the documentary does a very good job. If you think that if you don't like math, and you think that you don't remember much math from like college or high school, it doesn't really matter, because the person in the documentary is going over like the general ideas. They have nothing to do with the really understanding equations and things like that.
Yeah,
as a
I
word.
got it.
So
and I haven't taken a math class since 2006, so you'll be fine.
Right. And even for those that know math, it's very interesting to see the history of how the ideas of chaos and emerged in the scientific community, and the resistance that these ideas have at the beginning because of the whole Newtonian paradigm that probably we're going to talk about it a little later.
Yeah.
So in general, the documentary is pretty good. Shows how phenomena in nature and like they're all what they call complex system. Complex systems in general show unpredicted behavior. It doesn't mean that they are completely random. It just means that in the long term, it's difficult to really predict what they think the future states of these phenomena. And so the underlying idea is like in the documentary, at least what
we got out of it.
It's like human beings need to get used to the idea of uncertainty.
Yeah.
There is no certainty. It's impossible to predict everything in the long run. Even though you are able to model it mathematically, it's impossible to give predictions in the long run. So we need to deal with that delusion of certainty. I mean,
The illusion of absolutes.
Exactly.
Right.
These documentaries, and probably if you look in YouTube, you're gonna find another documentaries about chaos. That's not the only one. There is another one called like High Anxiety Mathematics that is also pretty good. But these documentaries, despite being very good, they fall short in the point of, like, we think that unconsciously still they have this idea in which chaos and unpredictability and uncertainty is always bad.
Yeah.
Right? And probably many people would agree and say, like, probably in many cases, uncertainty it's not a good thing, right? Because it produces anxiety, and
Right.
but although a lot of that have to do with the fact that we want certainty and that's impossible. But what we want to point out is like chaos and unpredictability and uncertainty, it's not always a bad thing.
Right.
Right? The example that they give in the documentary, like how despite the fact that you want to control a system, you always have the stock market is going to collapse, or
a hurricane is going to hit. Like, whenever they talk about the chaos side, and I guess they're doing this for, to entertain their viewers because they are documentaries. But whenever they talk about chaos, they always show like destruction and death and famine or natural disasters wiping out coastlines, or chaos is still presented as a negative.
right.
Even though when they're critiquing the Newtonian paradigm, they're saying that chaos is necessary. It's a natural phenomenon in that chaos, order, duality.
It's like at the unconscious level, still the Newtonian paradigm is operating because
Right. They just can't get that idea that
Right.
chaos is bad.
And the only thing bad about the Newtonian paradigm is that it was wrong because they found this thing called chaos.
Right.
And it's not because it's not wrong because, I don't know, it's an overvalue of order and structure,
Right.
which is the point that we want to.
It's kind of like the scientific method. This is how I think of the Newtonian paradigm, because
That's a good moment to actually. We keep talking about the Newtonian paradigm, but we haven't really
defined it yet. So the scientific method, the principle or the ideas behind the scientific method is that you take a control group and you study phenomena. So basically what you're doing is you're trying to control and reduce complexity and uncertainty in order to measure a phenomena and make predictions about that phenomena. And the scientific method is what we're all taught in high school. That is a perfect example of this Newtonian paradigm, because it's reducing complexity with the goal of increasing predictability
right.
and measurability of
Right.
natural phenomena, physics, all sorts of things.
Right. The Newtonian paradigm, for those that have taken calculus sometime, calculus is the mathematical child of the Newtonian paradigm. Of this idea that if you know the present state of a phenomenon, and you also know the way in which this phenomenon is changing, you are able to predict the future state of the phenomenon.
Right. And some people would say, okay, so all these chaos mathematicians or whatever, you guys, you're critiquing the Newtonian paradigm, so we should just throw it out the window. But no, that's going to an extreme and making a weak argument. We're not saying to get rid of the Newtonian paradigm or the scientific method. The problem arises when we as a society or we as individuals forget that this is just one paradigm and that it actually reduces complexity of phenomena.
And we overvalue that.
And when we overvalue that. And we assume that that's how nature actually works, or that that is good science.
Right.
Right. So we're not saying throw it out the window, we're saying just recognize that it is just a paradigm, it is a tool, to observe and measure reality, it is not reality itself.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Newtonian paradigm is the analytic mind, right? This idea that if you have a big problem and you divide that problem in small problems and you solve each one of the small problems, then you put together all these little solutions, you have the solution to the big problem, right? Which it's useful. The analytic mind, it's useful. My wife is saying you have to keep in mind that it's a simplification of a complex phenomenon. So the analytic mind goes in the way of like separating things from the whole, reducing things, like this thing is different from the rest, I'm just going to analyze this thing, right? So it's just one side of the thinking.
Right.
That's why what we say it's bad, it's not like the Newtonian paradigm itself is bad. What is bad is like we overvalue order over chaos, and that is an imbalance.
Right.
Right?
I think this would be a good moment to go to our second point,
Absolutely.
the order and chaos. In many esoteric or occult mostly European esoteric and occult sources, they talk about the divine masculine or feminine. So we wanted to talk about how we conceive the divine masculine and feminine, that order and chaos. Order would be the divine masculine, chaos would be the divine feminine principle, which we conceive as a duality. There's a difference between dichotomy and duality. Duality is a system in which the two ends of a spectrum interact and exchange with each other.
And balance each other.
And balance each other, ideally balance each other out. Dichotomies, at least in my mind, is thinking in terms of polar opposites, in which the two polar opposites do not exchange with each other, do not interact with each other, and oftentimes, at least, and I'm thinking in terms of like social issues like race, gender, gender identity, things like that, we think in terms of dichotomies, and then, at least in Western society and colonial society, I'm going to call it, we order those opposites in hierarchical structures. So we think of gender identity, male, female, male. So male is above female. It's a duality, and then on top of that, it's a hierarchical, unfair relationship between the male and female. Or if we think of gay, straight is on top of gay. Straight is preferred. So it's a hierarchical, imbalanced relationship. So that would be, in my mind, a dichotomy versus a duality, where the male and female principles or even gendered identities are equal. They interact and they're part of a continuum, right? Instead of strict dichotomous structure. So
where there is no balance.
Where there is no balance. When we talk about divine masculine and feminine, or sacred masculine and feminine principles, or God and goddess, in more kind of Wiccan terms, not necessarily connecting that with human gender expression. It's not an essentialist relationship. I'm not saying that because my physical body, I identify as a cisgendered female, that doesn't mean like I have more divine feminine in me,
right?
Or I'm just divine feminine, I don't have any masculine in me.
So they are just names. Don't like confuse them with gender or sexuality.
Right. Very human conditions and terms, very like physical plane, to sound kind of new agey.
A person with a biologic, a person with a female body, what we call a female body, could have
cisgendered.
Right, could have much more masculine energy than female energy.
Right. With the way they think or how they act, or things like that. So
let's define them.
So for me, the divine masculine I always associate it with the cards of the Magician and the Emperor. The Magician, if we think about consciousness and knowledge, is that very orderly, methodical,
Rational intellect.
rational intellect that uses distinctions to kind of, like you were saying, to order knowledge by
It would be what I call the analytic mind.
the analytic mind, exactly, which is useful, and I always associate the Magician with
No.
with this analytic divine masculine or the order kind of principle, because on the table you see he has all of his tools and he knows how to use these tools to gain more knowledge. So
this is at the psychological individual level.
Exactly. And then at the more kind of abstract or bigger picture kind of level is the Emperor. Because the Emperor literally represents order. I mean, he has the symbol of Aries, the ram, which traditionally represents, well, order. and structure. So the Emperor is structure.
This is also good to represent social structure.
Exactly, social structure. The divine feminine for me, on the flip side, would of course be the High Priestess and later the Empress. The High Priestess, if the Magician represents the conscious analytical mind, the High Priestess would be the subconscious or the intuitive mind. That way of looking at knowledge. Instead of looking at different parts of a whole, it looks at the whole. Right, and then
that's exactly the opposite. I would say also include the power of the emotions.
And emotions, exactly.
There is a difference between knowing something and feeling something.
Right, exactly. Like observing something and knowing it versus feeling and knowing it. That's on the individual. The more structural is the Empress. So if the Emperor is the social structure, the Empress would be that fertile energy that allows the social structure to either continue or collapse.
Revolutionary forces.
That revolutionary force, yeah, exactly.
And this tied again to what we were saying about how the documentary fall short in appreciating the chaos part.
Right.
So the female principle for us would be representing the energy of chaos, which is not always bad, because you can have too much order. That is possible. That's why sometimes there are revolutions, right? When the people, especially people, want to get rid of systems of oppression, that it's also chaos. So chaos is the force of change, right? You cannot have just order. Otherwise, we lost flexibility.
Exactly. Chaos also means empowerment for the individual, because if you think about the effect that one individual can have on a system, or if you have a system and then one slight mutation in the genes of this animal or one slight change in the system can completely and unpredictably change the outcome of the system, that empowers the individual person. If you think about, that cheesy and overstated Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I hate pulling that kind of shit up because it's just cheesy. But if you really think about it, at least within this context or within this duality of order and chaos, the individual person who, let's say, wants to fight against oppression or fight against poverty or, oppression, racial oppression, gender oppression, sexual orientation oppression, whatever, that individual can actually cause a greater change and a greater effect in society They just may not be able to predict it early on, you know.
Now, why we are saying this, one of the, and it comes back to also value chaos, right? Chaos is this unpredictable force, this destruction force, which is not good or bad in itself. It depends what is destroying or what is changing. So one of the, at least in the mathematical scientific context, chaos, first of all, doesn't really mean randomness. Right?
Oh, good.
Chaos means unpredictability, right? So it's not just this crazy thing happen in any type of way possible. No, it's just it's more like our lack of capability to be able to predict something. One of the important characteristic of any system, complex system that shows chaotic behavior is what in the scientific paradigm they call the sensibility to initial conditions.
Sensibility to initial conditions.
Exactly.
Okay.
What does that mean? And the other one big characteristic is the presence of feedback.
Oh yeah, feedback.
So these two characteristics, sensibility to initial conditions and feedback, are the precursors of chaotic behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny differences at the beginning in a phenomena, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the system has feedback, this tiny difference get amplified over time.
Mm-hmm.
So you can end up with two totally different outcomes, even though the
The initial state
were very, very close together, right? Why this idea is so important? Well, first of all, because of the problem of measurement. One of the goals of the scientific paradigm or the Newtonian paradigm is to measure everything. Well, it doesn't matter how well you want to do it, you always have measurement error. But if the complex systems are sensitive to initial condition, that tiny error that you can have in your measurement actually prevent you from being able to predict the behavior of the future state, right? Because of the presence of feedback, that tiny difference, that tiny error get amplified. So now coming back to the idea, why then we are saying that chaos, this force of chaos, empowers you as an individual? The linear thinking tells us that we as a one person are very tiny in the big order of things in the world. Right. So if we have a big problem, like social structure of oppressions are pretty big, there is nothing I can do because I'm small, that structure is super big, nothing I can do.
Right, that's what linear thinking tells
Exactly.
us. Whereas in the more chaotic and chaos theory,
right, or chaotic thinking or complex thinking, right?
That tiny difference, it's the butterfly effect basically, right?
Exactly.
That tiny change that the individual can make can over time in the greater structure cause a revolution.
Because of the property of feedback.
Right, and we're talking about social structures, like very human, societal level structures of oppression or whatever. But this also happens in evolutionary science, in in physics, you know, in the forest.
Exactly.
You know, this isn't just a human phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right.
So be careful what you decide to do now, because a couple of years in the future you are unable to predict the outcome.
Exactly. Be scared. No. Embrace it.
Embrace
it.
Good things happen sometime.
Yeah.
Like 7 years ago I was applying for a scholarship and now I'm married to a woman from a different country. That's butterfly effect.
Exactly. I just came to grad school to get a master's degree and figure out what I was doing with my life, and then I met this random dude from Chile who ended up becoming the love of my life. So.
Or if you like more general examples, I don't remember the first name, Parks. the lady that didn't want to like
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks. That's
There
a
you go.
beautiful example. She just didn't want to like give up her seat.
Right.
That tiny change in behavior was the trigger for like a huge civil rights movement.